The year is 2008. Hamilton looks like he's balding.
It was so not right.
BlackBerry was the most popular phone brand, and most importantly, we had an all-time season in F1 with Massa and Hamilton battling it out for the Drivers' World Championship with 1 point separating them. However, I'm not here to talk about that. Today, I'm going to talk about how Renault cheated and almost got away with it. But first of all, before the Singapore Grand Prix in 2008, there is some information that you need to know going into this. So, for the 2008 season, there were some rule changes that were taking place. And the big thing was what happened with safety cars and pit stops. So, in F1, in this era, if you went and had a pit stop, most of the time you'd be going to refuel your car as well, because you could refuel at different points of the race, which then meant that when you had a pit stop, these pit stops potentially could take up to 5 to 15 seconds, a lot longer than the pit stops we see now, which sometimes are under 2 seconds. So as you can see, straight away, there's a little bit of an issue, because we all know now that when a safety car comes out, you get a massive gap on your rival if you haven't pitted or you've just come into the pits when a safety car happens. You gain a lot of time. If the pit stops were any longer, you gain a ridiculous amount of time. And the FIA tried to put a stop to this, closing the pit lane when a safety car happened until the safety car gave the all clear. Now, it all sounds well and good on paper, but realistically, it never worked out and probably made more issues than it saved. Now about Fernando Alonso. After a not so fairy tale 2007 with his new team of McLaren, coming from Renault, winning the championship in 2006, over to 2007 with the McLaren, there was a lot of high hopes for him, and realistically, it did not go that well for his relationship there. Now, was his racing good? Of course it was. It was Fernando Alonso. But because of all of the inter-team bickering that they were all doing, it meant that Fernando Alonso lost out on the championship by 1 point to Kimi Raikkonen in the Ferrari. So, with so many issues at McLaren, he decided to go back to his old faithful of Renault. But what I didn't mention with all of this drama with McLaren was since he had left Renault in 2006, they had gotten quite drastically worse in 2007, with them only managing third in the Constructors' Championship, and technically that was fourth because McLaren got disqualified, so they didn't take their points into consideration. So on race pace, it was more like a fourth best car. A very big drop considering how just good they were in 2006. And in 2008, it wasn't much better, with them only managing fourth in the Constructors' Championship with 80 points. Now, that's not a mean feat, but it's nothing compared to what you need to win a Drivers' World Championship, let alone a Constructors' World Championship. And with Alonso getting 61 of those 80 points, it was safe to say he was pulling his weight. But you can't say the same for his teammate, the rookie Piquet Jr., and with him desperate to try and stay with the team in 2009, going into the new regulations for the cars, he was desperate just to show Renault that he would do anything that they asked. And with Renault not having won a race since 2006, at the time of the 2008 Singapore Grand Prix, they really needed a race win to keep their big lad of Fernando Alonso happy and to try and prove that Renault had not lost it. So with that all out of the way, this is the Singapore Grand Prix of 2008. In qualifying, it could not have gone much worse for Renault, with Piquet being knocked out in the first part of qualifying, and then in Q2, Alonso did not even set a lap, with the Renault having mechanical issues. So they started the race all the way down in P15 and P16. Not ideal. Oh, and fun fact, this was the first night race F1 had, and it was the first Singapore Grand Prix. Now, even before the race started, there was already a little bit of drama, as going through the formation lap, Piquet Jr. would actually spin, doing a little bit of subtle foreshadowing for something else to come later on. So then they all got to the line, and with 5 red lights, away they went, with Massa leading out of turn 1, followed by Hamilton in second place, but more importantly, with Alonso making good ground, getting up into P12. However, in typical street race form, the race sort of died down quite a bit. There was only a few overtakes that would happen in the coming laps. It was truly in the Toyota being overtaken by Rosberg, Nakajima and Alonso. Now, like I mentioned, with just how bad the qualifying was for Renault for the Singapore Grand Prix, they tried just something massively different from the rest of the field. So they put Alonso on very low fuel, trying to hope that he'd pick up a lot of ground and make up for it with some clean air if they pitted him, or just hopefully that he got potentially close to the top 8, because that's where the points were given. So that meant Alonso was the first car to pit extremely early in the race, putting him right at the back of the field. But then something miraculous happened on lap 14.
Gamble looked to have paid off when Piquet crashed heavily and brought out the safety car. The Red Bulls and Barrichello just...
Now, like I mentioned, one of the rules for the 2008 F1 season was that you could not pit under the safety car until the safety car had given it the all clear. Now, this meant if you went into the pits and went to refuel your car or put on fresh tyres, that would result in a big penalty for you. The issue was, because you could refuel in a race, that would mean that some teams who didn't have a lot of fuel in their cars would have to either pit or completely DNF out of the race with no fuel remaining in their car, which you can now see why it just was not a good idea to have this rule in place. So what happened is Alonso had already done his pit, he was on fresh tyres and had just refueled his car, and you had him right back in the field with everyone still to have to pit. Now, you also had a few cars who did eventually pit because they physically had to, which was Nico Rosberg in the Williams and Kubica in the BMW Sauber. That meant with the whole field bunched up, by the time the safety car gave the all clear, by lap 17, Alonso was up into P5, only behind Rosberg, Jarno Trulli, Fisichella, and Kubica. Now, for anyone who doesn't know anything about the grid in 2008, Toyota, not too bad, not the best team. That's what Trulli was driving. You then also have Rosberg, a Williams, again, not a top team, not terrible. Fisichella in the Force India, not in a very good car. It was terrible for 2008. And then Kubica, again, BMW Sauber, looked pretty decent, but by the Singapore Grand Prix, they had focused more on 2009 development, so that car was not as good as it was. So realistically, Alonso had on par or a more competitive car than all of the drivers ahead of him, and all of the big names like Hamilton, Massa, Raikkonen, all of them were struggling as they had to pit, and now they were all at the back. And to go back to those penalties I was talking about, two of the people in front of Alonso had to pit again to have a drive-through penalty for stopping when the pit lane was closed. So realistically, Alonso found himself in a net P3 after starting the race in P15, going to the back of the grid, and then miraculously finding himself all the way back up there because of one very lucky move. Oh, and one other thing that hasn't changed in F1 throughout all of its history was Ferrari did a masterclass in the pit stops. I'll show the clip right now. Yeah, happy to see that some things just don't change. Then, over the next 10 laps, Rosberg came in to serve his penalty, and by the time he came out of the pits, Alonso had passed him, meaning by lap 29, Alonso had jumped all the way up to P2 with only Trulli in his way. And then with Trulli pitting on lap 34, it gave Alonso the lead, which meant all Alonso had to do was just not crash out. And my God, did he deliver. Securing the first place win in the Singapore Grand Prix for Renault, their first win since 2006, putting themselves back in the limelight, showing that they could still build a very good car. And they would have got away with it if it wasn't for that meddling kid. Now, people were already a little bit skeptical of this whole Singapore Grand Prix situation. Piquet crashing at the exact time Alonso would need a safety car to come out. It all seemed too good to be true. But with no proper evidence, no one could say otherwise. It was just pot luck that it happened for Renault, and both of their drivers were involved. But the thing is, secrets always have a way of slipping out. And that is exactly what happened halfway through the 2009 season. A whole season later, Piquet Jr. in that Renault for 2009 season was not performing well, and he was very much at risk of losing his seat at Renault. And come the 11th round of the season, Renault had had enough and fired him from the team. Leading to, at the time, a young rookie who I'm pretty sure is quite notorious these days as well. You may have heard of him, Romain Grosjean.
I think Ericsson hit us.
Sadly, still not in the sport. But with Piquet rightfully pissed with this decision from Renault, he then had a big decision on his hand. Does he take the professional route and not spill the beans on what Renault had done the last season? Or does he go to the press, go to the FIA and tell them exactly how he played a role? And I'm pretty sure you can guess which one he did. And hey, I can't blame him. I think I potentially would have done the same if I had lost a seat. He had told everyone that it was no coincidence. He was told by the team to crash to help Alonso to get that win. From the team principal, Flavio Briatore, and Simmons, who were the big names in Renault at this time. And over the next 2 months, Briatore and Simmons would have to resign from their places in the team. Renault would lose countless sponsors as companies would not want to be associated with the team who cheated in F1. And who's to say how much this really did affect the whole Renault team? But we know now, since 2008, and 2009, Renault really have never looked like a big constructor, with them getting their highest finish in a constructor season in 2022 of 4th place, never cracking the top 3 since. But all in all, what we found out is that after all of the controversy and getting caught, Renault would keep their win in Singapore. Briatore's lifetime suspension was revoked. Simmons' suspension went from 5 years to 3 years, returning to the sport with Virgin Racing and then moving on to Williams in 2013. And then finally, Renault's disqualification for the 2009 season was then revoked. And with all things considered, as they got most of their legal penalties taken away, it meant that today we still have Alpine in the sport, which used to be Renault, and they pretty much got away very lightly.